All right. Hi, everybody. And I feel that this is an important presentation, and thank you for attending. Because I think that this is a subject that interests me and is more important today than ever before, because we're seeing a gradual increase in the incidence of cancer in the United States in all ages, especially in young people. So we have, as that's happening, we have more and more fascinating information to show that we don't have to get cancer, and that nutritional excellence has the ability to halt this deadly disease from afflicting Americans. So let's get started. I'm going to start with a little bit of review, and then I'm going to go into some newer information from more recent scientific studies that corroborates and reinforces what you're learning. First of all, inherent in this diet I recommend called the nutritarian diet, and the word nutritarian just means super healthy or with lots of a huge variety and amount of protective nutrients in it, right? We're using precision to make sure we include those foods that have the highest protection against cancer. And that's what we're talking about here. And I'm highlighting these foods with this acronym GBOMS, which have obviously many of you have heard before. Greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds. And we'll talk about a little bit in more detail as we go along. But right now, we know that the green vegetables consist of, right, things like lettuce and cooked vegetables like broccoli and artichokes, and raw vegetables that we might eat in a salad like arugula or baby kale or spinach we might eat raw in our salad. And what I'm saying right now is that a variety of green vegetables in different combinations, in other words, eating both raw and cooked and cruciferous and non-cruciferous, all of them, when you include all those different categories in the diet, it adds for dramatic health benefits because we are a green vegetable dependent animal. Without green vegetables, we can't have a normal immune system and we can't have normal defenses against cancer. We need green vegetables to manifest normal defenses against cancer. And then we're going to talk about beans, their powerful effects, including soybeans, onions, scallions, and garlic, eating multiple varieties of mushrooms in our diet, berries, cherries, citrus fruits, pomegranates, kumquats. We'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about seeds. All right. First of all, I want you to memorize these words, and the words I want you to memorize are these words. You could write it down. Raw vegetables have the most consistent and powerful association with the reduction of cancers of all types. That's not that too hard to memorize, because if you can memorize that or write it down and put it on your refrigerator, it reminds you to have at least one giant salad every day as a main dish of a meal. Like I do it at lunch. I have a big giant salad at lunch, and I include all these powerful anti-cancer substances we're going to learn about during this lecture, right? And these substances include in the salad, include lettuce, some raw cruciferous, like arugula or baby kale or watercress or bok choy. Some sprouts we're putting in the salad too. And we're also putting in tomatoes and onions or scallions, right? Onions or scallions, all these things are in the salad. And then to make those anti-cancer nutrients more highly absorbable, besides chewing them well, is by adding a dressing that contains fat from nuts and seeds, not from oil. Because let's say we're adding walnuts and sesame seeds. Well, we're just put on the salad, besides adding fat to the salad, we added a sesame seed, an unwhole sesame seed, which has 18 to 20 milligrams of lignin per tablespoon that is dramatically protective against cancer. So we're talking about all these individual ingredients that we include in the dietary portfolio that give us incredibly powerful protection against cancer. Here's, for example, a study on over 100,000 Asians showing that cruciferous vegetables had the strongest effect on being correlated with the longest lifespan. In other words, as cruciferous vegetable intake went from 1 cup to 2 cups to 3 cups to 4 cups, as people ate more, in a dose-dependent manner, it predicted how long people lived. And you know what we're finding? We're going to learn about in this discussion today. It's not just eating the cruciferous vegetables, it's chewing them well that determines their effect to prevent cancer. So we'll talk about that too. And that green vegetables and the isothiocyanates, which we call ITCs, we abbreviate the isothiocyanate into the 3 letters ITCs, are most likely the most powerful anti-cancer ingredient in the diet. That's why we're purposely eating green vegetables and sprouts to get these high levels of ITCs in our diet. And it's not only the sulforaphane ITC in broccoli or broccoli sprouts, which is so high, it's getting the full spectrum of ITCs, the full spectrum of isothiocyanates, not just sulforaphane, not just indole-3-carbinol, but there's a lot of different ones now. We're realizing that each one particularly works synergistically to aid in the body's defenses against cancer. And we'll talk about that, how powerful that is. And that's why we're including maybe some arugula on our salad with some sprouts that include some broccoli sprouts. And we're having, sesame seed lignans, and we're maybe having some bok choy, and we're berry and lettuce. Lettuce is so super important, and people don't recognize about how lettuce is a superfood that protects against cancer. But right now we're talking here about the aryl hydrocarbon receptor. This is new data about how cancer develops, how the body protects itself against cancer regarding the aryl hydrocarbon receptor, or AHR. So we're talking about AHR, aryl hydrocarbon receptor, and we need the cruciferous greens and the other, we need green vegetable intake to stimulate or activate the AHR to grow the intraepithelial lymphocytes. Those are the immune defenses that line the digestive tract to make for a robust, healthy digestive tract where the tight junctions are closed, and we're able to keep pathogens, viruses, bacteria, and toxins out of the body because we have a thick and healthy biofilm. And you can't have a thick and healthy biofilm without a robust intake of green vegetables. And I talk about these 4 foods, 2 raw foods and 2 cooked foods that give us the most robust and healthy biofilm and immune system. And the 2 raw foods, of course, we talked about them already, are the raw green vegetables in your salad and the raw scallion and onion, and even garlic raw. We use garlic in dehydrated raw garlic granules in our vegetables and sprinkles, which add another layer of protection. And then we have the 2 cooked foods, cooked beans, which is a variety of beans in your diet, including soybeans, and cooked mushrooms. And that includes a variety of different mushrooms. If you can't access a variety of different mushrooms, then you use the mushroom powders, or we use both, a variety of 9 or 10 different mushroom powders with cooked mushrooms. And we want to do both, not just the powder and think that's enough. You also want to eat fresh mushrooms too. Okay, lettuce to the rescue. We're talking here about people don't recognize that eating and chewing lettuce and mixing it with your mouth, with the saliva and the bacteria in the mouth, produce anti-cancer compounds, anti-inflammatory compounds like nitric oxide, but they're our richest source of sulfoquinavos, which is the fuel that the bacteria in the gut, the healthy bacteria in the gut, live off of. And lettuce, of course, is low in oxalic acid, gives us lots of good minerals and calcium. But of course, chewing and eating lettuce on a daily basis is a secret to longevity. Now, going back a little bit in time, recognize that in years before, thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, people ate more wild dandelion and lettuces and greens that grew wild in the forest. They ate more all types of things, purslane, things that grow weeds. They ate more greens, right? And it wasn't until and most of what people ate in the history of the world, there's a lot of things that people could grow or find growing wild in their environments. They were eating more natural foods, more natural plants. And, it wasn't until about 400, 500 years ago that we first noticed cancers they've been developing. I think this is saying the 18th century, and that means the 1700s were the first time in the scientific literature that cancers were first even noticed. Like they noticed scrotal cancers and testicular cancers in chimney sweeps, people who worked around smoke from, and then of course, nasal cancer and snuff users and Hodgkin's disease we noted in 1832. But it wasn't until after the Industrial Revolution where we started eating more processed foods and having and less of our own grown foods. And even in our country, in the United States, cancer mortality shot up over the last 100 years or so, because obviously people stopped eating foods from their own gardens and what they grew on their own farms and homesteads. And we ate more processed foods, more foods out in restaurants, and even foods that we bought in the supermarkets in packages. So we saw that because even in the Victory Gardens in World War I and World War II, our government was recording and advising people to grow a lot of their own food, and about half the calories consumed in America before 1940 was food with calories produced on people's own homes or in their own gardens or farms. So our diet has, you could say, deteriorated today, where 60% of the diet is processed foods like oils and refined grains like sugar and honey, and the other, and we're eating a huge amount, like 35% of calories from animal products, if you add it all up. And the amount of really colorful vegetables, take away potatoes and ketchup for a minute, and whole grains, and just talk about colorful vegetables, is 2% of the American diet, and beans just a tiny bit. So we're talking here that the money is in the fruits and vegetables and beans. That's the foods that are most protective against cancer, and nuts and seeds that Americans are not eating, right? So we're not eating the anti-cancer foods, and we're eating more processed foods, more fast foods, more fried foods, including we haven't cut back our animal product consumption, which is also a major driver of cancer. But throw on extra body weight and extra fast food and extra fried food on top of the consistent consumption of about 35% of calories from animal products, and we have caused an explosion of cancer in the United States. So as you can see, cancer is not predominantly genetic. It's a lifestyle disease caused by environment and diet. And we can see these are based on statistics from before 2020, so before the year 2000. So this is 20 years ago, where we saw breast cancer rates between 50 and 70, the normal breast cancer, where breast cancer was relatively rare in many countries around the world that were still eating more plants than we were. And of course, in Western Europe and England, we, of course, had high rates of cancer. And so we're seeing that when these populations adopted their diet more Western ways and more copied the way we were eating, their cancer rates went up. Just documenting that cancer is not a primarily genetic disease. We don't have to have cancer. We know that there are proven factors increasing risk of breast and prostate cancer that are well established today. And they are early puberty. In other words, the foods we eat in our childhood, particularly foods that maximize growth, like meat and dairy and eggs and cheese, things that maximize growth, make us grow faster and mature faster, produce more hormones like estrogen, and more growth hormone is produced to have bigger humans, more IGF-1. And this combination between hormones, extra insulin from overeating calories and eating too much sweets, extra estrogen produced by being overweight and being extra calories and having more body fat and having more animal products, and extra IGF-1 or insulin-like growth factor 1 from taking in more animal protein and particularly more dairy products in childhood, facilitates acne and excess growth and later life cancers. So what we do as a child impacts that, but we could mitigate that by changing our diet later in life. But of course, we know that body fat is a major driver of cancer, because body fat makes you insulin resistant and has you have a higher circulating insulin level your whole life, because now your body has to produce more insulin. Even no matter whatever it is you're eating, you've got to produce more insulin, get the sugar out of the blood when you're more overweight. So having excess body fat is a major risk factor for cancer, and body fat also drives estrogen production. So 2 out of 3 of those hormones are lifted up into the cancer promoting range when you're overweight. And just excess calories in general drives hormones that promote cancer. So alcohol, of course, is carcinogenic. And I see somebody has their hand up, but don't remember, I'm going to take a lot of time for questions at the end. So don't worry, we will get to all your questions and answers. So even a little bit of alcohol is a significant risk factor, particularly in women for breast cancer. And I'm also saying not only is a little bit of alcohol a risk factor, I'm saying a little bit of mushrooms and a little bit of flax seeds and a little bit of preserved vegetables and a little bit of sesame seeds and a little bit of all these healthy things, a little bit of sage, rosemary, and thyme, a little bit of green tea extract, a little bit of all these good things are powerfully protective, and a little bit of the bad things are still powerfully negative. And you've got a choice. You're going to have to make a choice here, right? So of course, we're talking here about the consumption of fast food, commercial baked goods, and eating white flour. We're talking here about eating white bread and bagels and pizza crusts and burger buns, also obviously turn into sugar in the bloodstream, which then spike up insulin, just like animal product intake spikes up insulin-like growth factor 1. So what I'm discussing right here is these hormones that promote cancer that we need to throw in the witch's cauldron of cancer causation is insulin, IGF-1, and estrogen to promote these common hormonal cancers. And we do that by eating more meat and to get the IGF-1 up, and more sugar or white flour to get the insulin up. So we can easily create cancer by feeding people pizza and hot dogs and bagels and chicken sandwiches and meat, spaghetti and meatballs. We can easily get these people to produce cancer by feeding them an American diet. That's why I say the American diet's been, I make the joke, it's not really I say the American diet's been designed by Al-Qaeda because it couldn't be better designed to kill people than to produce all these negative factors. And then you go to doctors and get drugs which increase cancer risk too, because drugs for autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and ulcerative colitis and psoriasis and all these autoimmune conditions, instead of cleaning up the diet and getting the body healthy, doctors throw immunosuppressive drugs and steroids in the mix, which further increase risk of cancer. And then, when you go to doctors with viral infections and you're antibiotic seeking, they can't hold back their prescription habits. They want to give people what they want, even when they know antibiotics aren't valuable or effective for viruses. They still write prescriptions for people who use antibiotics needlessly. They're not just taking them for pneumonia or for life-threatening infections like cellulitis, but they're taking antibiotics. They estimate that 90% of antibiotics consumed in America are used inappropriately, and they're linked to both breast and prostate cancer. And of course, taking hormones, postmenopausal hormones, taking more estrogens, even blood pressure medications are linked to risk of cancer, and of course, radiation exposure and medical testing. The point is to live in a manner to avoid the need for medicinal substances is the best way to live a long life. Your life's choices really affect your risk of cancer, and this is what this is all about. And I know some people could be angry because I'm not blaming anybody when they get cancer. I don't know. They're raised in an environment that's a cancer-producing environment, and people are socialized to think that's normal behavior, and people are threatened by the idea that they actually have control over their health destiny. They're threatened by that because they're addicted to food. They feel they have no control over their food choices, and they feel that when they get a disease, they don't want to feel responsible for it. So this is sometimes a hard message for people to swallow, that they really are in control. But I have compassion for people who were raised in these countries with cancer-promoting ways. But this new information gives people a different choice, and I think this should be reading, writing, arithmetic, and nutritional science taught in every grade school across the country or the world, and people should know they have a choice here. Now, the World Health Organization and more than thousands of studies, and by the way, I've reviewed more than 30,000 studies on this subject. So I'm well versed in all the studies that show that this is not confusing. This is clear. There's a preponderance of evidence showing that luncheon meats, barbecue, and red meats are linked to colorectal cancer and other cancers, and that dairy products do drive particularly ovarian cancer and prostate cancer, and dairy fat and saturated fat turns on the CD36 cancer control of these saturated fats allow cancer cells to replicate and metastasize, and that white foods like white rice and white flour and sugar, that means these wheat products people are eating every single day, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day, are cancer promoting because they keep the insulin elevated and keep sugar running through your bloodstream. So just to review here what we're discussing, some of the basics before we get into the details, is that saturated fat from meat and cheese turns on the CD36 fat controller. And what that means is that, any fat, cancer cells run on calories. Calories are fat, carbohydrate, and protein. So extra fat, extra carbohydrate, extra protein, extra calories drive cancer. But cancer cells upregulate the CD fat receptors. And when you get a caloric rush from cooked oil in your bloodstream, eating fried foods or eating saturated fats from animal products, it allows cancer cells to grow faster and replicate and metastasize and spread. And of course, we're mentioning animal protein. We're going to talk about that for various reasons, that animal protein doesn't only raise IGF-1. We're going to talk about that first. There's other mechanisms via which animal protein drives the spread and metastasize and enables cancers to metastasize and spread in your body. So it makes cancers become more invasive and more aggressive. All right, first of all, we know that there's a strong link in scientific studies between more animal products and cancer. We know that just from the consumption of red meat and cancer, but I'm saying other animal products that are high in protein also drive cancer, like chicken and fish as well. And because the mechanism involved is because one of the mechanisms involved is raising of IGF-1, that we want to have adequate IGF-1, but when you start to add animal products in your diet in a dose-dependent manner, from 5% of calories to 10% of calories to 15% of calories to 20%, as that percent of animal product goes up, so does IGF-1, because the extra biological protein, your body has to be turned into hormones. It's not peed out that readily. It's not turned into fat as readily. It's turned into a growth hormone, particularly IGF-1, that then allows cancer cells to replicate. So IGF-1 being elevated is like a necessary ingredient in cancer causation, but lower levels of IGF-1 through life is linked to longer lifespan and more and slower the aging process, right? And animal protein raises IGF-1, and dairy protein is powerful at raising IGF-1, but plant proteins don't raise IGF-1 because obviously beans and seeds and greens are rich in protein, but because they're not as biologically complete, and because of the other nutrients they contain, which we're going to talk about, they don't show the effects to push IGF-1 into the unfavorable levels. And here's pooled data from 17 studies on IGF-1 levels in breast cancer, showing that as IGF-1 goes up, so does breast cancer risk goes up in accordance with that. Now, we mentioned this aryl hydrocarbon receptor, so I want you to learn about this and know what this means. Now, this is a beneficial receptor in the lining of our digestive tract and the cells that line the digestive tract, because we need to stimulate the aryl hydrocarbon receptor with green vegetables and other flavonoids that then will enable us to activate our immune system. But when cells start to become damaged and they start to become precancers or cancer, they get overexpression of the aryl hydrocarbon receptor, and then stimulation of the aryl hydrocarbon receptor promotes the growth of the cancer and the invasiveness and spread of that cancer, so that now we need things to antagonize the aryl hydrocarbon receptor when a person has cancer. So when we're talking here about the fact that we're trying to prevent cancer and we're trying to make a person live when they have cancer or stop the spread of cancer. By the way, about half of all people over the age of 60 have cancer cells in their body. So everybody, half of people have, if they've eaten unhealthily, they have these, they've upregulated their aryl hydrocarbon receptors, right? So precancerous cells start to upregulate the aryl hydrocarbon receptor. You get overstimulated this receptor to make tumors grow. And these plant foods that have a beneficial effect on activating the aryl hydrocarbon receptor in the gut have an antagonistic or anti-receptor stimulating effect in cancer or abnormal tissues or tumors. This is really a new fascinating finding in the history of science, that how important the overgrowth of the aryl hydrocarbon receptor and these things that stimulate are promoting the death from cancer. So the the aryl hydrocarbon receptor, AHR, and activators are dioxin and the polyaromatic hydrocarbons from cooked meats. So when you put chicken on the barbecue, you cook meat in your oven, you brown, you darken, you eat things, heat up essentially animal products. People like them crispy, they like them darkened, they like them blackened, they like them barbecued, and that produces more polyaromatic hydrocarbons. And the more chemicals in our environment, the more we stimulate and activate the AHR to metastasize. And of course, we're talking here about these animal proteins don't just raise IGF-1, but they're high in methionine and tryptophan, which activate the aryl hydrocarbon receptors. And then the tryptophan is converted in the cell, in the abnormal cell, into kynurenine, kynurenine, is a toxin that suppresses immune defenses in cancer cells and also allows cancer cells to become invasive and spread. And so we dial up these risks in the cancer cell when we feed them animal fat with the CD636 receptor, and more methionine, tryptophan, and animal protein drives up the risk of cancer becoming invasive and really interferes with and defeats the ability of therapies like anti-stress therapy, like chemotherapy in an aggressive cancer if it's needed. Or we're talking about all these abilities to fight cancer are negated or defeated when you're going to have a dial-up animal protein. So now, tryptophan is high in animal products, but tryptophan is also relatively high in soybeans. But soybean tryptophan behaves differently, pretty interestingly, pretty fascinating, right? Because the tryptophan in because soybeans are low in methionine. That's the tryptophan methionine complex that really promotes those receptors. But the saponins in soy and other beans, of course, suppresses the MMR9 receptor. It's an enzyme, the MMR enzyme. It's a gelatinase enzyme, which you know what this enzyme does, MMR9 does? It kind of like makes it so cancer cells can escape the initial tumor. It like degrades collagen and makes a pathway for cells to be able to go outside of the tumor and spread through the bloodstream and spread to the whole body. So MMR9 allows a tumor to spread and become cancerous, and the saponins in soy suppresses that. And also, the soy suppresses the estrogen receptors, the ER, that drives cancer. So we're talking here about this combination. There's such a combination of products in soy that makes it have powerful anti-cancer effects. And of course, we're talking here that the suppression of soy versus the suppression of MMR and estrogen receptor versus the activation of MMR9 and estrogen receptors, one drives cancer cells replication, the other prevents it. So that's the MMR being activated, of course, with estrogen receptor activity can activate the vascular endothelial growth factor, which allows now blood vessels to grow and spread to feed cancer growth, and of course allow cancer cells to spread to parts of the body. And of course, it says right here, upregulated in CRC, that means colorectal cancer. Colorectal cancer, see, the leading causes of death in the United States, of course, the leading cancers are breast cancer, prostate cancer, and colorectal cancer. And even though there's more women dying of breast cancer, colorectal, if you put men and women together, it's still a more common cancer than breast cancer. So colorectal cancer becomes number 2 for women and becomes number 2 for men, number 2 cancer. So it's important. So these MMR9, the gelatinase enzyme, is very important in the spread of colorectal cancer. And of course, we're talking about a meta-analysis here showing that soy isoflavones in soybeans, the people who eat soybeans or don't eat soybeans, just that comparison, not eating them or yes, eating them, here showed a 25% reduced cancer risk, even if the diet was otherwise poor, just if they ate some soybeans. So we're talking about now that the conversion of tryptophan into kynurenine, which promotes cancer, now is blocked now by these antagonists, right? By these AHR antagonists that are flavonoids. And we get a major flavonoid that blocks cancer is the camphorol in lettuce, spinach, and arugula. So these raw green vegetables and you get much more of it raw. When you start to cook the spinach, you almost get none. So we're talking here about eating that. Are you having a salad today? And did you put some lettuce? Was there a little spinach in the lettuce mix? Was there arugula in there? I didn't put any spinach in my salad today, but I had lettuce I picked in the garden, and I had some arugula, and I had some sprouts. I had mixed sprouts I made in my sprouter, which had lentil sprouts and radish sprouts and broccoli sprouts and mung sprouts all mixed in. I put that in my salad too. And then I got lots of quercetin in my salad from onions. I put a lot of onion and scallion in my salad. But you get quercetin from parsley and fennel and sage, which are other powerful anti-cancer ingredients, but they're very rich in quercetin, which is a powerful flavonoid that blocks the conversion of tryptophan to kynurenine, which promotes cancer, right? And artichokes are really rich in luteolin, which lettuce and radicchio and peppers and artichokes are very high in these things. So we're talking here, these exact foods that we've culled and measured their anti-cancer potential in the past. Now we're actually learning the mechanisms of why a variety of these plants gives us such powerful anti-cancer protection. And I'm going to show you cases where how this works and how effective this is, and how if you're going to an oncologist and he's treating you with medicine or surgery or radiation or whatever, and they don't know about the powerful effect of nutrition and food, you're not getting proper cancer treatment. You can't, medicine is not this stuff is tremendously more powerful at extending lifespan. And true, there are various cancers that are slow growing where chemo doesn't work. And there are cancers that moderately grow where chemo might extend life a little bit, like 1 or 2 months, are hardly even worth it. And there are cancers that are very aggressive where chemo is important to use or you're really in trouble. But in any one of those cases, by not mixing the food element in with that, you're in trouble. If you have a slow-growing cancer where chemo is not going to work, then the food is going to work. If you have a fast-growing cancer where chemo is going to work, then there's always going to be some stray cells that escape, and 5 years later are going to come back and kill you because those cells that escaped were the ones that were not sensitive to chemo. And even though you kill most of the bulk of the cancer, recurrence of the cancer now is not easily to treat. And the immune system now that's well fueled with all these substances can seek out and destroy. It's called immune surveillance with apoptosis, killing of cells that we see are abnormal that survived the chemo. That we're going to show you all these cases of people who needed chemo with an aggressive cancer and now are still living 15, 20, 25 years later, and they're not all dead like the other people are who didn't follow the diet. In other words, this diet is very powerful. And it's extremely necessary you learn about this. And the indole 3-carbinol, of course, is a ITC. We talked about the ITCs, having the variety of ITCs found in cruciferous greens. And also the flavonoids, the EGCGs from green tea is a powerful blocker of the conversion of tryptophan to kynurenine, a hard word to say, right? And of course, we're talking about these polymethylated flavonoids that are found in citrus fruits. Who knew that? We knew that berries and cherries and pomegranates and kumquats were so protective against cancer, but who knew there are 6 unique polymethylated flavonoids in citrus skins and membranes that so powerfully protect against cancer? Now I'm feeling good about all the citrus fruits I'm eating and the fact that I grew kumquats in my property. That even when I lived in New Jersey, I had a Mayway kumquat plant growing in the outside in the wintertime in a pot, and I brought it indoors in the winter but in any case, when you eat a kumquat, and the Mayway kumquat, MEIWA, I think it's spelled, Mayway kumquat, is a small round kumquat, but the point, it tastes sweet. It's a very good tasting kumquat, not the round ones that are oblong that taste sour. But these sweet tasting kumquats, you eat the skin and the pulp and the pits, and you chew the whole thing up in your mouth. But the point is that the membranes and the skin of the citrus fruits have powerful anti-cancer effects. Now we're skipping back to animal protein for a few minutes because I just want to review a few studies that some people are saying sugar causes cancer. And you can eat animal protein as long as you don't eat sugar, it's not going to cause cancer. But that's not what the studies show. Now we have more than a dozen studies. Here's one of them that followed people for about 20 years and followed a 4-fold increased risk in cancer deaths compared to those with lower animal protein intake. That's when they compared like 6 to 8% animal protein to like 20% animal protein, which was all much lower than what Americans were already eating. They showed a quadrupling of the cancer deaths as animal protein went up and a 75% increase in overall death in the highest quartile of animal protein consumption. And then we have, of course, animal protein in many other studies showing the same thing, that here's a 25-year median follow-up study looking at overall deaths and cancer deaths and showing more animal protein made for more deaths and more plant protein made for longer lifespan and less cancer. But interestingly, the people with the most early life deaths before the age of 70 were people on keto diets where they were carbohydrate restricting. When you can carbohydrate restricting, you're cutting out fruit, you're cutting out colorful vegetables, you're cutting out beans, and you're dramatically increasing risk of cancer. So what these studies are finally showing, they're putting, the knife of death into keto and carnivore diets, showing how dangerous they are. And here's 8 other studies corroborating that. And I'm saying we have tremendous corroborative evidence showing that all these different studies that track people over the decades of life to seeing how long they live and whether they get cancer and how long they're surviving are showing that more animal protein makes for more death. He has 4 more of those studies. showing exactly the same thing, that more animal protein made for more cancer deaths and cardiovascular deaths and all-cause mortality, and more plant protein foods led for longer lifespan. And what are high plant protein foods? Well, green vegetables, beans, and nuts and seeds, the foods that we say are so important for people who want to live a long life and protect against cancer. Some people are advocating keto diets. They're so into this low sugar thing that they think they're going to kill cancer cells by not allowing the cancer cells to have the sugar it needs to replicate. And it's true. Cancer cells, abnormal cells drive cancer, but unfortunately, even though what they're finding is that the tumor can rapidly switch over. It feels like it's struggling a little bit with no sugar coming in, and then it just revs up more receptors and more of the fat receptors and more of the other where it can live more on the fat and more in protein, which drives cancer. So it's only very short-lived. And also the keto, the lack of sugar, and when the cells are forced to switch over, they produce more of those collagenases to allow cancer cells to replicate, to escape the sugar deficient environment. So what they're finding are, the researchers found that when they put people with cancer, various cancers, on keto diets, it led to the cancer become more invasive and more metastatic potential. And when you get cancer and you die, you mostly don't die from the primary tumor, you die from the metastatic potential of the secondary tumors that spread through the body. That's what kills the liver and the kidney and the brain, and that's what kills you. So we're talking here that keto diets are linked to enhanced metastasized metastatic potential in multiple cancer types. And lots of studies are demonstrating that. So as opposed to all the publicity keto diets are getting and carnivore diets may be getting in social media, the science shows otherwise, that they're dangerous. And I should mention the fact that some people think the best diet is a Mediterranean diet, which is good that it has tomato sauce in it and some vegetables in it. But the problem is that we're not eating clams and crabs and mussels and, because what are bivalves? Bivalves are mussels, scallops, clams, and oysters. Those are bivalves, right? They have the bivalve means those two parts of them, clams, scallops, oysters, and mussels. And because they're bottom feeders and they filter a lot of water, when we're eating these foods on the continental shelf, they're not, in the middle of the ocean and off polluted continents where we're dumping, thousands of tons of garbage into the ocean and agricultural runoff, we get algae overgrowth and we get BMA toxin produced by cyanobacteria, and the cyanobacteria concentrates in bivalves more than in ocean fish, and also in lake fish, because lakes can't spread the water out. You have more BMA concentration with more agricultural runoff causing more algae overgrowth and BMAA toxin in the lakes, and we see clusters of Parkinson's dementia syndrome and ALS. It's called ALS-PDC, which stands for, of course, the ALS disease is like Lou Gehrig's disease, and PDC means Parkinson's dementia complex, Parkinsonian or Parkinson's dementia complex, which regarding both other neurologic diseases occur from the exposure of these toxins. So we have to be very careful when we're eating seafood, and and even the animal protein can drive cancer cell replication, which we're talking about here. But the toxicity of seafood with the nanoplastic particles, even things like sardines, we eat the whole digestive tract or fill of plastic compounds in the digestive tract of a sardine. So we've got to be, and in the bigger fish that come, then you have more toxic metals and more dioxin in those, which also activate cancer. So we're talking about you have to take care and not just think that seafood is okay. It's not okay. We have to restrict all types of animal products. So to review what we talked about so far, to review a little bit, and we'll go into some more details. We're talking here about a diet rich in a wide diversity of phytochemicals, phytonutrients from colorful plants, particularly vegetables and beans and nuts, right? Beans and seeds, particularly G-bombs, regular exercise, keeping our calories favorable so we don't have excess body fat. Those activate that lifestyle activates longevity hormones like SIRT1 and AMP kinase, which slow the aging process, keep our stem cells healthy and our telomeres not to degenerate as fast. So we can see that people are not aging, and we can measure those aging parameters by measuring telomere length or epigenetic changes with these aging markers. And we can see that if we want to age a person fast and we want to promote cancer-promoting hormones and drive an mTOR is elevated in 100% of invasive cancers, all we got to do is push the animal protein, give excessive calories, more body weight, push the body weight up in the fat weight, and add more high glycemic carbohydrate to that with some white bread or sugar or honey or maple syrup or white rice with it. Mixing high glycemic foods with white rice with the meat is still driving breast cancer, right? You don't have, so we know how to drive cancer. You mix glycemic carbohydrates with animal products, and you have people overeat on it. That drives cell proliferation, makes the body insulin resistant, activates cancer-promoting genes, turns up angiogenesis, and is obviously allows your body to be a cancer-promoting factory, right? A cancer cell promoting factory. And cancer cells to grow need blood supply, and they need sugar, and they need fat, and they need calories, they need nutrients, and they need blood vessels to grow into the tumor to bring the nutrients and the oxygen to them. And we're saying that angiogenesis inhibitors, because the word angiogenesis means the growth of blood vessels to feed the fat supply, the growth of new blood vessels to feed the tumors that want to grow. And when we eat mushrooms and onions and garlic and soybeans and cinnamon and berries and green vegetables, these are angiogenesis inhibitors that don't allow cancer cells to glean a blood supply. Now, angiogenesis is activated by sweets and by steroids and by insulin and by body fat, right? So you can either turn on a cancer-promoting environment or turn off a cancer-promoting environment. And the most powerful things we're saying that turns off the environment are the ITCs found in cruciferous vegetables, but particularly, right, if you eat these ITCs raw rather than cooked, because the ITC isn't actually in the vegetable, right? The ITC is formed in the mouth as you chew the vegetable because, well, I'll show you this. Let me go back here and say that these ITCs, we're talking about their ability to prevent cancer cell replication, invasion, and metastasis. Yes, that's for people who have cancer. But this slide is talking about preventing a cell from becoming abnormal to begin with, right? Removing carcinogens or toxins from the cell, detoxifying carcinogens and removing them, promoting death of abnormal cells before they become cancerous, keeping estrogen low, right? Repairing damaged cell DNA. We're talking about the exposure to green cruciferous vegetables that contain ITCs prevent cancer from being started. And also, if you have cancer cells, it prevents it from progressing, and it also enables cells to go back the other way because people get cancer cells in the body, and the cancer cells in the body can then proliferate and form tumors and get worse, or the cancer cells can start to go the other way and disappear and not be detectable anymore. And we can do that nowadays with blood tests. We can detect like certain proteins in the blood that multiply when people have cancer. And you know that with breast cancer, with mammograms too, you can see that a large number of people with positive mammograms with no treatment, a lot of those positive biopsy diagnosed cancers go back to normal and disappear and will never kill a person. So we're talking about the concept that it's well established that there's a large percentage of people that are overdiagnosed with cancer with mammograms that have early stage cancers that not only don't progress, but they reverse and go away. And I'm saying to you that we can make these cancers go away with more predictable in a predictable fashion when you take in a high level of these beneficial substances like the ITCs and cruciferous vegetables. And here's a study on cruciferous vegetables of people who have breast cancer with about 5,000 breast cancer patients with a 62% reduction in death. When they didn't do the nutritarian diet, they just told them to eat cruciferous vegetables on top of their conventional American diet. And we still saw the breast risk of death reduced by 62%. And of course, we have more studies that document that with regard to when you eat vegetables, right? The Women's Healthy Eating and Living study showed that cruciferous vegetables prevented the development of cancer, prevented death when you had cancer, and adding more different foods on top of the vegetables, like adding fruit or berries or green tea or mushrooms to the green vegetables, even got more protective effects. Now, keep in mind that the myrosinase enzyme is a little packet in the cell wall. You see that myrosinase packet in the cell wall of the cruciferous vegetable cell? And there's no ITC in there, is there? No, it's not even in there. You have to chew the cell wall to break open those little packets of myrosinase, and you're chewing it open in your mouth, or you're putting it in a blender or a juicer, but it's best if it's in your mouth because you're mixing with saliva and bacteria in the mouth forms more anti-cancer compounds. And the point I'm making is how well you chew determines how much ITCs that are formed, because how many of the cells can be broken open to release their myrosinase. If you overcook it, you can deactivate the myrosinase. That's why you have to eat a lot of this stuff raw or just a little bit cooked or like partially cooked, like in a wok, where it's not overcooked. Because you know what's interesting is that urinary ITCs correlate with low rates of cancer and cancer survival better than intake of cruciferous vegetables do. The best thing that correlates is urinary ITCs because that takes into account whether the person took the cruciferous vegetable and overcooked it before they ate it, because you're not going to get much ITCs in the urine if you overcook it, and how well the person chewed it. If you just ate them raw or cooked and you didn't chew it very well, you're not going to form many ITCs in the urine. So by measuring urinary ITCs, we can see, yes, the person ate a lot of cruciferous vegetables and they chewed it real well because they have enough and they absorb them. You don't form them and absorb them if you're not chewing the vegetable well. And the cell doesn't just flip to become cancerous. It gradually gets, the DNA of the cell gets damaged little by little. And so it goes through a precancerous phase that may be for 15 years in a precancerous phase. And then it's an early stage cancer for another 10 years. And then it finally gets to become a invasive cancer, and then it starts to metastasize and spread. The point I'm making here is that this process of the cell becoming abnormal starts early in life. But at some point in your life, when you start having a large exposure to these beneficial nutrients, these defects that occur to your DNA can start to disappear, and the body can fix these defects over the years that you stay on a healthy diet. So the longer you stay on the unhealthy diet, the more defects that are formed until the cell eventually gets cancer. But along that phase of progression, you could intercede and have that go the other direction with exposure to these elements we're talking about here, particularly large exposure to G-bombs, right? So vegetables work even if you have cancer. I mentioned the WHEAL study, the Women's Healthy Eating and Living study, which showed that when women ate more cruciferous vegetables, more green vegetables, they dropped their cancer recurrence and they lived longer. So this is really very, very exciting information to give people control at any stage you are on your journey. When's the time to switch to a nutritarian, this precision nutrition, which I call a nutritarian diet? And it's precision because we're identifying the particular food and food elements that show the most protection against cancer and putting a dietary portfolio together with the recipes of how to cook it to maintain the nutrients and put it together so you still get the maximum cancer effects. That's why, for example, I'm telling you to have a salad with lettuce and arugula with raw scallion and onion with some sprouts, and then make a dressing like an orange sesame dressing on it. Like I love that orange sesame dressing. I blend oranges and kumquats. I put in some lemon. Lemon is powerful. Those flavonoids prevent cancer. Squeeze the lemon. I use a little blood orange vinegar in that. I put a few cashews and some unwhole sesame seeds in. I'll even lightly toast some of the sesame seeds to sprinkle them on the salad too. Because don't forget, I've told you that sesame seeds are rich in those anti-cancer lignins. The bacteria in the gut turn the lignin into enterolignins, and the enterolignins powerfully block the estrogen exposure to the breast or prostate, leading to breast or prostate cancer. And the fat from the dressing, which you have from the nuts and seeds, facilitate the absorption of the anti-cancer nutrients that was in the lettuce and the arugula and the spinach, right, and the onion, right? So it's all, in other words, precision nutrition means we're utilizing recipes and dietary, putting together dietary portfolio with all these ingredients that maximize your body's defenses against cancer and makes you live a long, healthy life. Now, beans are an important part of this, and beans have the inositol pentachous phosphate, the lignins, the polyphenols. We're talking about the flavonoids and the resistant starch. And also, beans give us protein adequacy and carbohydrate adequacy. We get enough protein and carbohydrate from them, but they don't drive blood sugar up to make insulin spike because they're such slowly digestible carbohydrates that they feed their calories in the bloodstream over many hours. They dribble it in there like an IV drip. They don't spike the calories in your blood, making you have to have an high insulin response. So that's why beans are the most favored carbohydrate, and they're high in protein, right? But they don't drive up animal protein. They don't drive up IGF-1 like animal protein do, and they don't turn on cancer and make a cancer cell invasive by turning on the aryl hydrocarbon receptors like tryptophan does from meat. And they're powerfully protective against cancer. Just women who had 2 servings of beans a week lowered the risk of cancer by 24% when the Women in the Nurses Health Study. It's like they're ridiculously protective against cancer. And the high glycemic diet increases the risk of cancer, and that means even on people on plant-based diets, right? They're eating diets where those diets are not targeted to make a longer life and prevent cancer. They're eating too much, right? Even if they're whole foods, maybe they're eating too much rice, too much grain, too much potato, even white rice, or they're not using enough variety and precision to include enough of these beneficial foods for the diet to really manifest its anti-cancer potential, including onion, right? The onions are tremendously protective. Here's just one study looking at various cancers in Europe and showing that people who consumed more onion had a 50 to 88% reduction of common cancers. And I was, just fascinated because I didn't used to like onion when I was young. And I read all these studies showing how protective onion was against cancer. You know what? I got into healthy eating by reading Dr. Shelton's books that he wrote in the 1950s and 1940s. And he was against eating onion and garlic. And then I said, oh, it's good. I don't even like that stuff anyway. But as I studied around my own study of human nutrition, as I got interested in this as a career, it was overwhelming amount of studies showing onion and garlic had cancer-fighting abilities and were beneficial to the diet. And this is one of those examples of the hundreds of studies I've read on onions showing, and garlic, by the way, showing how powerful they can fight cancer. Mushrooms are another example that powerfully inhibit angiogenesis, but mushrooms uniquely suppress aromatase. They inhibit aromatase, and aromatase is the enzyme that produces estrogen in the body. And the mushrooms very powerfully lower estrogen so they don't stimulate breast or prostate cancer. So mushrooms are so important. They help immune recognition and immune surveillance. In other words, they help the immune system recognize abnormal cell surfaces that could be a sign that a cell is becoming dysplastic, going to form a tumor, or become abnormal, or can turn into a cancer. And having mushrooms in our diet on a regular basis helps our immune system recognize and remove cells that could be abnormal. Furthermore, mushrooms are the richest source of ergothioneine, which is amazing. There's actually a nutrient in mushrooms that binds to a receptor on our cell wall that helps stabilize the DNA against carcinogens causing cancer breaks. I mean, it's like, wow, this is like so fascinating that mushrooms contain ingredients to help us protect us against cancer and protect us against potentially toxins in the environment that makes us live longer. It's just amazing how we are a human animal that's tied into our natural world, right? Like the Avatar movie, where all these natural products in the world enables us to protect ourselves against smoke or against toxins or against whatever it is we're under stress that we're protected when we have our connection in the natural world with all these individual phytonutrients that come from plants, these natural plants. But the problem is you have to eat these plants. So did you have your mushrooms, your onions, your flax seeds, your chia seeds, your sesame seeds, your berries, your walnuts? Did you have your green vegetables with your sprouts today and your salad? I did. Did you have berries with your breakfast? Because berries or pomegranates or cherries and citrus fruit have very powerful effect to reverse the DNA damage that can then proceed on to cancer and prevent can take early dysplastic cells that are moving in the direction of cancer and cause them to move back in the other direction. So we're talking here about the powerful anti-cancer effects of berries, cherries, pomegranate, and citrus fruit, even lemons, right? And tomatoes have powerful effects. And when you cook a tomato, you increase and tomatoes have powerful effects against both breast and prostate cancer. And when you cook a tomato, you enhance their absorption of the protective compounds like lycopene. But it's not just lycopene and cryptoxanthine and carotene, and it's not these individual compounds. Don't forget, there's more than 100 different carotenoids. And it's the diversity of these foods green, yellow, orange, red, right? All these foods, blackberries and blueberries, all these different colorful foods we're eating that contain different compounds. And tomatoes have these substances in them that reduce the risk of most common cancers, but not if you just took the lycopene out of the tomato and took it in a pill. You got to eat it in the whole tomato form, right? That's why tomato sauce is so great to flavor foods with tomato sauce. So we're talking here about tomatoes' effect on all types of cancers. And I also mentioned earlier about the lignans being so protective against breast and prostate cancer and colorectal cancer, against the three leading cause of cancer. Here's a study of survival study on women who had breast cancer, followed for 10 years, and they found those who ate a third of a milligram of lignin reduced their risk of death by 71% over the 10-year period. But I'm saying you're not supposed to wait till you get cancer to consume lignans. And what is a third of a milligram of lignin? 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed gives us 21 milligrams of lignin, not a third of a milligram. We're supposed to be eating 20 to 30 milligrams of lignin a day, not a third of 1 milligram. We eat 300 times. Hold it, a third of a milligram. If you went to 3, that would be 10 times, and we're eating 30, right? So we're eating 100 times the amount. I'm eating 100 times the amount of lignans that they used in this study, because I ate flax seeds, which have about 21 milligrams per tablespoon. I had some chia seeds this morning too, not a whole tablespoon, but I had a teaspoon of that, which had another probably 3 or 4 milligrams of lignin. And I had sesame seeds in my salad, which sesame seeds are 18 to 19 milligrams of lignin per tablespoon. And I had that into my salad dressing for lunch with the cashews and my, and the citrus fruit I put in there. It's crazy. I'm getting huge protective effects of these individual nutrients that work synergistically, right? And there's also herbs and spices and other extracts that protect against cancer powerfully. One, for example, is the green tea catechins. The EGCG from green tea has a very powerful effect on inhibiting progression, invasion, and migration of cancer cells, but it also prevents cancer from developing to begin with. So we're saying that the green vegetables, the mushrooms, the berries, and the green tea, and we're talking about some of these extra elements to add to the diet to give you enhanced, powerful effect to prevent cancer from developing and spreading. And green tea has powerful anti-angiogenic effects, which prevent cancer cells from spreading or gleaning a blood supply to metastasize and grow. And it inhibits IGF-1, right? Green tea, and it keeps IGF-1 low, which we're talking about being a cancer promoting from animal products, and protects DNA damage and has anti-estrogenic effects. So you're seeing the relationship between green vegetables and mushrooms and green tea and all these foods and soybeans and beans have similar synergistic effects that make your body very inhospitable to cancer cells. When you eat a nutritarian diet with all these individual factors, right? All these individual precision that prevents cancer cells to replicate. There's too many factors that are going on top of each other. It just doesn't let cancer cells grow. So turmeric's another one of these things that we're eating turmeric powder, and curcumin is the extract from turmeric that we concentrate to give people in a supplement to get more absorbability out of the anti-cancer ingredient of turmeric. So we use dry turmeric, and we use black turmeric, and we use for its anti-proliferative and apoptotic effects. Apoptotic means killing of abnormal cells and removing them, right? And we're using it in salad dressings. We make a Thai curry sauce with cumin and turmeric at night with some lemongrass, right? To a Thai curry sauce on a mixed vegetable wok, let's say, with cabbage and snow pea pods and the mushrooms in there. And then we're taking extra supplements, and we use these supplements different in people who have cancer. I may take a little bit of mushroom extracts by taking 1 extra mushroom supplement a day, maybe I'm taking 1 supplement to get my green tea extracts and my turmeric and curcumin derivatives to help my anti-cancer potential, but not when I'm treating a patient with cancer. When I'm treating a patient with cancer, I'm giving these things in a different vehicle, because then they're having them 7 in the morning, 12 noon, 5 p.m., and 10 p.m. at night. And if the cancer is a dangerous cancer, I'm giving them, and when they wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, between 1 and 4 in the morning, I'll have them take another pill. We keep these substances floating in their bloodstream all day and night to chronically suppress or starve the cancer cell from being able to replicate, so to induce more higher risk of remission. So it's not just giving these extra supplements for cancer that we know have anti-cancer effects, and of course, juicing to bring the level of nutrients up in the tissues faster, because some of these people don't have a great appetite, so we're juicing to get their levels of nutrients in the tissues higher. And we're also giving we're giving a little higher amounts of supplements more around the clock. So the prescription on this nutritarian diet that we're talking about, just in general for you and me, is we eat at least a half a cup of beans a day. And of course, if you're bigger and more exercise, you eat more of these foods. I'm just giving a minimum amount of the food to eat, not a maximum amount to eat. You can eat, some people need more food and should have more food, but I'm just saying eat at least this much, eat at least a half a cup of beans. And some of that beans should be soybean. And at least in the week, have some soybean in there. Soybean is a longevity promoter. Eat at least 3 fresh fruits a day, and some of that fresh fruit should be berries or cherries or blackberries or wild blueberries. And I love to buy frozen berries because you can buy the frozen organic wild blueberries and the frozen blackberries. They're fresh. They don't have monk fungus in them, and you can just use what you're using for that day. Even if it's just a little bit, even if it's just a little bit of berry frozen from the freezer to put into your morning, whatever you're eating, oat or quinoa, whatever you're eating in the morning. I think today I didn't have any grain with it. I just had the berries and the seeds with some soy milk. With some of my supplements, I just had the berries, the seeds, and something. I didn't have a grain, but sometimes I cook grain in a pressure cooker. Like I'll put oat groats or wheat berries in a pressure cooker, and I'll put it on the bean setting to make it really soft and mushy. And I'll have a little of that, or I'll have some soaked overnight oats or something. And I'll put the beans, the seeds and the berries and the soy milk in that or something. But a lot of times, but sometimes I'm not that hungry because I just can skip the grain. But I'm always going to have those fruits. I'm always going to have those seeds. I'm going to have at least a half an ounce of nuts and seeds with every meal to facilitate the absorption of the anti-cancer ingredients. So I had my tablespoon, at least a tablespoon of ground seeds with breakfast. So I have that's the half an ounce, at least half an ounce. I have the seeds with my lunch dressing, too. So I'm saying minimum of 1.5 ounces a day of nuts and seeds. You can have 2 or 3 ounces if you can handle that amount of calories from if you're a bigger person or you don't need to lose weight or you have to exercise, and you could have more, right? And I have one large salad a day. My mantra, what I'm going to say, make the salad the main dish. In other words, do you have at least one meal a day where a large salad is the main dish of that meal? I do. I do try to do that almost every day. And do you have some cooked greens like Brussels sprouts or broccoli or cabbage or that are maybe cooked in a wok, with mushrooms? And do you have another serving of cooked vegetables at dinner in addition to your big salad for lunch? And are you using both cooked mushrooms in a variety of them and raw onion, which includes a variety of both scallion and onion and red onion and garlic, because garlic is in the onion family. And I use these granules of raw dehydrated garlic granules to sprinkle on my soup or to add to my salad or add to my vegetable dish. Adds a great flavor because I can't eat like raw garlic out of a clove. It's too bitter and too strong tasting. But when you have these dehydrated raw garlic granules, they work great. So I use those too. And then we supplement smartly because our diet is mostly plant-based with nutrients like zinc and B12 and DHA and EPA because we're not eating seafood, which contains those nutrients. And we're getting some supplemental extracts with the curcumins, the EGCG, and the extra mushroom extracts. So we're designing this prescriptive or precision nutrition to fight cancer. And here's 9 representative cases I pulled up just to review these, because I think this really hits home, these last few slides here. Number 1, let's go over this some of these cases of people who followed my nutritarian protocol because they had cancer, right? One is a 58-year-old woman with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2003. Received no chemo. She just followed the program. After 4 months, she lost 40 pounds and the tumor shrunk to half the size. And after 1 year, no residual tumor was found, and her Hodgkin's disease was gone, disappeared. And it's not the only case of Hodgkin's disease going away, number 1. Next person is stage 4 melanoma spread to the body. Had surgery to remove the primary tumor, and the lymph node biopsy confirmed that the melanoma had spread. 1 year, the melanoma was gone on the program, and couldn't be detected further. pretty amazing. Okay, here's the person, the third case, that a person diagnosed with testicular cancer in 2012 after being on immunosuppressive drugs for ulcerative colitis, which these drugs we talked about earlier in this presentation increase the risk of cancer, right? So we got testicular cancer after being on mercaptopurine and other dangerous drugs for ulcerative colitis. He couldn't even take the chemo because because ulcerative colitis was flaring, was not good. But he decided to switch over the diet and do this 100,000%. He did it perfectly. And after 6 months, his testicular cancer went away. It shrunk. It was undetectable 1 year later, and he recovered. And his ulcerative colitis went away too, and he didn't need drugs anymore. So he totally recovered. Here's another case. Here's a woman aged 52 with stage 4 metastatic ovarian cancer, where her right lung was collapsed, and there was 4 liters of fluid extracted from the lung with a chest tube put in to re-expand the lung. She was given a poor prognosis in spite of getting chemo. She needed chemo because the cancer had spread. And now, more than 25 years later, she's still alive with no recurrence of the ovarian cancer. You think the probability of that, being alive 25 years later with no reoccurrence of cancer when she was giving a prognosis of 6 months to live, would have happened without the nutritarian, without this protocol? There's another person, 55-year-old woman in 2016 with JAK2-induced thrombocytosis with splenomegaly, which is a type of bone marrow cancerous. And her platelet count was more than 900,000, right? So within 9 months, followed the program, no chemo, she refused chemo, her platelet counts dropped to 300,000, and she remained normal with no disease, and of course, she lost a lot of weight too, so I think she lost 80 pounds, and there's a 46-year-old with premenopausal invasive ductal carcinoma in 2010, and almost a 4-centimeter mass was found on the breast. She was given chemotherapy prior to mastectomy, but she started a diet and took the chemo with the diet because it was an aggressive breast cancer at a younger age. And then at the time of surgery, there was no cancer that was detectable. And of course, not only was no residual cancer found from a combination of chemo and the diet, but of course, chemo alone does not typically make the cell disappear, but in some cases it could disappear. But the facts are, now this is decades later, right now we have more than 20 years later, 2010 to 2020, 2025 now. So it's 15 years later, right? So it's 15 years later, no recurrence of cancer. That's the thing, is that these people within 5 or 10 years get recurrence of their cancer. And what we're seeing here is that the nutritarian diet, even when it's coupled with conventional treatment, scavenges out cells. The diet alone couldn't get rid of the primary tumor. There was too much bulk of cancer and then invasive cancer. Maybe the chemo was needed. But now, any cells that escape that primary tumor, the diet takes care of. Here's 3 more cases we'll just mention. One is a invasive ductal carcinoma breast cancer, metastatic to the bones with bone scan. And the doctor said her cancer was so far gone that the chemo would not significantly extend her lifespan. They thought she was going to be dead, and that there's nothing they could do really. So she refused the chemo because the benefits of the chemo were so slight at that point. And she made a complete recovery with the program. It was like, what? I sent the bone scan in and it came back negative, but there was no cancer. I didn't believe it. I thought they mixed it up with another patient. I said, no way. So I repeated the bone scan again, and it came, confirmed that it was clear. Anyway, she survived another 20 years after her initial metastatic cancer diagnosis. That was back in 1995. And here's a 45-year-old female who was on a vegan diet who had metastatic ovarian cancer in 2003, went through chemotherapy with complete remission, and now no recurrence of cancer 22 years later. And last but not least, a representative case of prostate cancer, just a male, a 66-year-old male with prostate cancer, which is very common, with a PSA of 20, which is not that high. He had a Gleason score of 7, which means his cancer is not the most slow growing, but not the most fast growing. It's kind of in the middle, like it's not too bad, but not too, so it's kind of like a mid-stage prostate cancer with a PSA of 7, but his PSA dropped to 16 in 4 months, dropped to 12 in 8 months, and dropped to 10 in 1 year. And then later, with the next year, his PSA dropped to 5. And then since the first few years, his PSA has been stated below 2.5 with no further evidence of prostate cancer since then. So this gives us tremendous amount of hope, right? It gives me a hope, and it makes my work is exciting because I don't feel I have to give up on people. And I feel that the power of nutritional excellence is tremendous at all stages of life. But of course, I want people to do it early as possible in life and not get yourself in a bad position. And a lot of the information here is taken from my book, Eat to Life, just to mention that. And that's my closing on my presentation. I'll stop screen sharing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fuhrman, for all that information. So where can people get your books?
Well, they can get my books anywhere, but they can, Amazon or anywhere else. But if they come to my website, they can get a lot more than just the book. Right? I have a lot of services, products, and teachings and information present on the website where people can get more information to take this further and support from other people doing it, not just from me and my staff, but from other people in support groups and group conversations on the website and the member forums. But in any case, I am, I chose this as a career, like, I don't know, 40 years ago, and I'm still passionate and excited about this to even after all these years, love doing what I do because I think that there's tremendous power that in spite of opposition and craziness out there, there's tremendous power in the simplest things people can do at home to prolong their life and protect themselves.
Great, thank you. So we'll jump right into the Q&A. Given how powerful the results are from the patients that you see, tons of case studies, as well as a lot of research out there, why is there so much confusion both in the public and with medical practitioners?
Because there's not much money in this. The money is in selling drugs and promoting meat and the actual meat and dairy industry, the restaurant industry. They spend billions of dollars on publicity, and they put some of that money into research to try to create phony research to make people confused too. Like they'll do, I can tell you, we can look at research and go over how some bad research paid for by commercial interests. But the point I'm making is that there's a tremendous amount of social media and information out there that's particularly put there to confuse people so they don't make the changes that commercially hurt special interests, including the sugar interest group, including the meat interest group, including the dairy interest group, including the soy bashing that goes on. The people promoting a carnivore diet. Who would believe that people are following a carnivore diet of all meat? It's the most ridiculous thing anybody could even think that could be beneficial to their long-term health. But people still do it. You can convince people of almost any crazy thing. But what I'm saying right now is a lot of money behind those things. And you're not going to get a lot of money promoting eating broccoli and promoting sprouts you can make in your own home. And there's not a lot of money being promoting the nut industry or the point. I think that it's a difficult uphill climb, but the research is clear and the preponderance of evidence is on the side of what we just discussed for the last hour and a half.
So you just mentioned that you've been doing this 40 years and you're still very passionate about this. Have you seen a movement toward this type of lifestyle, or due to that confusion we just spoke about, it's still kind of stagnant?
I don't know. I thought there was a growth, but I think in the last couple of years, I don't know. It's hard to know.
Okay.
The
And
question is, we're reaching more people, but I think there's more population in the growth of the population. There's more people eating unhealthily too. We know we're seeing a growth of cancer and a growth of cancer in young people. So I know that we're not getting through. I mean, I had 5 years of PBS television shows that reached, millions of viewers, and millions and millions of people following. And there's so much more information about this, and so many other doctors who are complimentary or corroborating in the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. There's so much more information. You'd think that people promoting it, but there's so many people promoting the other directions and pushing other things too. So people are just, I don't know, they're just as confused as ever.
is this carnivore diet, which has really kind of just become popular, I feel like in the last, few years, is that the same or similar to the keto diet? Is it drastically different?
Well, it's different. I think the carnivore diet is even restricting plant foods even more, and you have some people just only eating animal products, other than the little bit of they're not eating animal organs. At least most people on a keto diet might be eating avocado and coconut and green vegetables because they're low in carbohydrate and still eating their animal products with it, which at least they're eating green vegetables. But there are some people but the carnivore diet advocates are against all plants, and they're just taking all plants out of the diet and just eating only animal products, like a carnivorous animal. So that, is particularly ignorant and dangerous. So that's what can you do? Can't help everybody.
And what is the role of salt in health?
Salt is a major factor driving cardiovascular deaths worldwide. We have lots of studies on primitive populations that don't salt their foods, and those populations do not have heart disease or high blood pressure in the population. Now, we do get salt in natural foods. When you're eating fruits and vegetables and beans and cucumbers and lettuce, and we're eating food, there's sodium in there. And food has the sodium that the body needs. The question is, how much becomes excess? How much becomes harmful? Just like anything in excess can be harmful. And the answer to that is that when you take in low amounts of sodium, or the relatively low amounts in food, our body holds on to sodium. It doesn't sweat it out. Our sweat is water, not salt water. And we don't urinate out sodium. And when we eat too much sodium in our diet, added sodium, even if it's from a healthy salt, what people call a healthy salt, there's no such thing as a healthy salt, by the way. That's just a marketing scam, like Himalayan salt or salt from the Celtic Sea or salt from behind the moon or the Rock of Gibraltar, moon rocks. I don't care where it came from. It's still 2,300 milligrams of sodium per teaspoon, not per tablespoon. And the studies all show that you see longest lifespan and most protection against cardiovascular death when people eat less than 1,000 milligrams a day of sodium. So that our diet gives us 600 to 800 milligrams of sodium. We don't need any extra sodium. But as you start to go up above 1,000, it's different. Men and women are different. Maybe 800 for a female and 1,100 for a male, and kind of body size. But as you start to see sodium go up to higher levels, you see increased risk of cardiovascular death because salt causes intravascular hemorrhaging. It slowly weakens and damages the interior lining of the blood vessels over years of eating it. And a leading cause of death in plant-based eaters around the world, and a leading cause of death in Asian countries like rural China, is hemorrhagic stroke. And hemorrhagic stroke has an inverse relationship with cholesterol, meaning lower cholesterol, less animal products and lower cholesterol increases the risk of hemorrhagic stroke. So you don't protect yourself with a plant-based diet against stroke if you still eat salt, is the point. And that, remember I'm mentioning that there's no salt in the sweat because we're taking in low amounts, we're holding on to it. That means we can go exercise in the heat, play tennis, go for a run, do a triathlete, play basketball, sweat and we're not going to get electrolyte deficient because we're not sweating out our electrolytes. So we're not going to cramp up when we're sweating because we're on a low salt diet. Because these people on a high salt diet, they excreting electrolytes in their sweat and their urine, they're not just eliminating the extra salt. The body can't remove the sodium without losing other beneficial electrolytes along with it. So they're just constantly being electrolyte deficient and magnesium and potassium and deficient because they're always having to get rid of the extra sodium they don't consume. That's why the American College of Cardiology and the American Heart Association recommend people with heart disease keep their sodium level down below 1,500 a day. And I'm saying that is so ridiculous for two reasons. Number one, because if it was right for a person with heart disease to keep their level below 1,500 a day, then why would we wait till a person have heart disease to cut their level down? Wouldn't we have the whole population do that? That's like telling a person who has lung cancer should stop smoking. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. They shouldn't just, Number two, if you read the 30-page document, which gives the references, the sign of references of why they came to that decision by the American College of Cardiology, they're saying right in the document that 1,500 is not ideal, that below 1,000 is ideal, and they just came to 1,500 because that was what they thought Americans were willing to accept. And if they recommended the ideal, that too many people would reject the whole thing and wouldn't even try to do it. So they came to a decision what was socially acceptable, not what was scientifically ideal. So right, I am advocating, to answer your question, yes, I advocate the S.O.S.-free diet, sugar, oil, and salt-free. But that does, relatively salt-free. If you had a little mustard, a little tomato sauce that had, 100 milligrams a day added to the 800 you got in your food, it's not going to make a difference if you had an extra 100. But if you went to a restaurant and had a bowl of soup with 1,000 extra, you know what I mean? So you know, a little extra is not going to be any major factor, but it's relatively sodium free.
So you're saying that if we were just to eat plant-based, we would naturally get 800 milligrams in our food alone?
Yes, we're getting about, I would say about 400 milligrams of sodium per 1,000 calories you're consuming. So if you had 2,000 calories a day, you get about 800. Person needs 3,000 calories a day. They get more protein, they get more sodium. In other words, your needs are proportional. Your needs of electrolytes, your needs of protein, your needs of calories are all proportional to your caloric intake. When you need more calories, you need more protein, but you get it with the extra food. You know what I mean? So yes, about 400 milligrams per 1,000 calories.
So not that we should be eating packaged foods, but when we look at those packaged foods and it has the daily recommended amount, a daily recommended amount of sodium, and a soup has like 40% or 50% of your sodium for the day in it, we have to keep in mind that we're already getting 800 milligrams. So we really it's actually taking up a bigger percentage of what's left over. Does that make sense?
Yes, but also they're using what's daily acceptable is what's acceptable to on the general people, which is not the 1,500 generated by the American Heart Association. That's like 2,000 by the regular dietary recommendations. So they're advising you is still too much sodium. The general recommendations are not my degree, not my recommendations. They're saying that you should consume and you could consume too much sodium. So they're allowing you permissively to eat too much sodium.
Is potassium chloride a healthy salt alternative?
It's okay, but I still don't recommend it because it perpetuates a person's desire to want salty foods, and it maintains the deadening of your taste buds. See, people don't, you know what my favorite food is? Artichokes. I don't want anything on the artichoke. I just want plain, ordinary artichokes that were steamed. I just love plain celery. I just love zucchini that's lightly steamed, with nothing on it. I just love the flavor of the just the steamed zucchini. The point I'm making is, if you're salting your food and you're using these salt substitutes, then you're deadening your taste buds. So you never get to the point where you like vegetables as much as you should because you're not tasting all the flavor in vegetables. You're not getting. So I'm saying that by getting you acclimated to it, it increases your taste muscle, the strength of your taste. And now there's more subtle flavors in vegetables and natural foods you can enjoy more by not exposing yourself to the extra sodium, by not using a salt substitute to take the place of the sodium.
So salt is known as a flavor enhancer, where it brings out the flavor in things. So we really should be looking at more, kind of inverting that and saying that it's really a taste bud deadener because it's overwhelming or overstimulating our taste buds and making everything else, their natural state, not taste very good because it doesn't have that added pop to it. Is that
That was very well said.
great? Thank you. So you mentioned sweating. And the late John McDougall mentioned, I think it was last year, that that you shouldn't smell, right? Like there's so many products now for every area of the body because everyone smells everywhere. And he said you shouldn't smell. What are your thoughts on that? And what does it mean when you do smell? Like when you sweat?
Well, the sweat is an organ of elimination, as is our breathing. Our lung, we breathe, we urinate out poisons and toxins and extra urea and nitrogenous wastes, but we sweat out and we breathe out toxins as well. And the more toxic your body is, the higher the rates of nitrogenous waste from overeating animal products, and the more putrefaction you get in the digestive tract. When you're producing more other unsavory chemicals from bacterial fermentation. So we're talking here about when you overeat calories, when you eat till you're full, now you are getting more, you're not digesting the food as well because you're short on digestive enzymes because you eat till you stretched out your stomach.
Mm.
So whether you're eating animal products or eating too much of one particular food, or you didn't chew very well, eating whatever it is you're doing, the more putrefaction, the more you add salt, the more you add meat, the more unhealthy your diet is, the more stuff is going to come out in your sweat and in your breath and in your urine and making your urine smell more and your sweat smell more. So,
Okay, that was very interesting, and I want to make sure I understood what you just said, which is when you overeat, you actually digest more poorly because your enzymes, the enzymes that would help break down your food in as part of the digestive process, you only have a finite amount, they get used up. So that food that would have been digested via those enzymes is less digested and therefore has to be eliminated through, the various ways and could add to the odor. Does that?
Yes, you get more, you should say putrefaction. You have more bacterial growth, overgrowth of bacteria, small bowel bacterial overgrowth from overeating. And so we get just the right amount of bacteria, the most favored bacteria, when we eat the right amount of food. And then when we chew the food better, you're not just breaking down nutrients for better absorption, you're also mixing it with more endothelial growth factor that helps repair and make for a more robust lining of the digestive tract that's more resistant to acid degradation and more immune ability of the digestive tract to keep toxins out. Because the digestive tract is an orifice, is a tube outside of the body. It's really outside the body. And by chewing our food and mixing with saliva, that coating of the digestive tract helps protect, and the right bacteria growing keeps things out of the body in that tube that runs through the middle of our body.
So you talked about chewing multiple times, and just so people have a baseline, how many times should people consider chewing at a minimum? I mean, not that everyone's going to sit there and count, but just to say we should chew more is kind of amorphous. What would you say as a number?
Well, I don't know, because some people say, chew 25 to 30 times. But I'm saying I have a different recommendations. My recommendations are having a mindful awareness of what the food feels like in your mouth. Because with chewing more, and try to resist swallowing and keep the food in your mouth till it feels like that it can't be chewed anymore, like it's liquefied. So I'm eating my salad and I'm not always remembering to chew that well, but to keep reminding myself as I go to say, oh, the first half of the salad, I could have chewed better. I'm gonna really focus for the next 5 minutes and really chew this stuff to a complete liquid. I just keep reminding myself, keep it in there, keep chewing it, liquefying it, get the most out of it. Because I'm taking the time and the attention to include all these great things in. I cut up the scallion, I grew sprouts to put on there. I put pomegranate arils on there, were frozen. If I'm gonna throw it all in there, I might as well try to get the maximum benefit from it by chewing it really well, which takes concentration.
Do people hate you for how long you take to eat?
No, because they're around me. I'm all surrounded by people who are all reminding each other. My wife and my kids and my people and my guests, we're reminding each other, don't forget to chew. We're good, so we're all in this, I'm kind of hanging out with like-minded people.
That's great. So, cooking methods. Obviously, we know frying is bad. You talked about when you cook meat and the types of things that happen during cooking. Do those things also happen to plants? Like, is it the cooking method as well as the product, or is it the cooking method?
It's hard you can't form as much of a high concentration of these dangerous compounds when you cook plants because there's so much water content. You put a pepper in the oven, the skin might blacken, but the inside or a mushroom, the high water content and the cellulose is not going to burn like that and form polyaromatic hydrocarbons. So it's very hard to form these toxins with plants. But you can overcook bread and overcook and bake things and make them crusty. And you could fry things and make like chips and things with more of these hard acrylamides, the dangerous compounds. But it's much easier. The concentrations are much higher in animal products. But that's why we're using so much water-based cooking methods. We're making soup with like vegetable bean soups. We're wokking things in a wok, and the tomato or the pineapple in the wok and the mushrooms that have their own fluid to keep the things moist, and then putting the broccoli or the cabbage in there. So you're tossing things in a wok, so you're not burning it. You could always put a little fluid in the wok, but I don't even need to. The tomato and the pineapple has it, and whatever I'm putting in the wok adds enough fluid to it. And so I'm kind of like half cooking it in the wok and it prevents it from burning, or I'm steaming something, or I'm blanching it. So I'm using a lot of water-based cooking, which then prevents the formation of these compounds that could have been formed from caramelization of the food or overcooking the food. So we're not using a raw food diet, but we're using a lot of raw food, and the cooked foods are mostly conservatively cooked to prevent the formation of those unsavory, unbeneficial compounds.
So if something's caramelizing, that's too much cooking.
Right. So if you're cooking a sweet potato, I'd rather you cook it at 340 or 330 for 2 hours to get it soft rather than 360 or 375 for an hour and a half and have it caramelized. Chefs want the sugar dripping out of it to sweeten it more, and we'd rather have it get soft but not have the sugar dripping out of it. We want to frying an onion in a pan. We could fry an onion in a hot pan with no oil till it starts to glisten, forms a little translucence to put it on the eggplant for a flavor. We're not going to cook it so it browns. True, browning it may bring out a little more flavor, but it's probably it's healthier not to cook it so it browns.
And is there a certain, general percentage of raw versus cooked food that you like to see in a diet?
There's a wide range of acceptability here. I make it so my lunch is mostly raw. I have some soup, but the beans and the vegetables in the soup are usually made so that to maintain their nutrients, we'll blend the onion before we pour in the soup. So I would guess, if you look at by the size of my plate, it's probably 50-50, 60-40, somewhere in that range of half and half raw and cooked, but I'm paying attention to have a lot of raw food, particularly in my big salad for lunch. I have one meal a day that's really, and sometimes I'll have some soup with a salad, but a lot of times my salad's so big, I just would have a salad and a couple of pieces of fruit. I don't even bother with the soup for lunch,
Great. And would it be great to, or can we eat as much raw greens and sprouts as possible?
Well, within limit. I mean, some people, you don't want to eat till you stretch out your stomach till you're full. You don't want to eat till because that's going to create indigestion, and it's going to take too long to digest the food and even create reflux. In other words, yes, within reason, as long as your body weight's favorable and you're chewing very well and you're not eating till you're full or stuffed, you could still eat a lot of food. If you chew it really well, you can fit a lot of vegetables in there. So the point is that we're not eating thimble-sized portions of food. We're satisfied by what we're eating because we're eating a pretty big amount of food, and it's satisfying. So we're not walking around hungry, so you can eat it. And it tastes great with the salad dressings and the sauces we're making. And the sauces and the salad dressings, the point of those they contribute to the nutrient level of the diet. The dressing of the sauces are healthy in themselves. Not like a condiment that's unhealthy on a healthy. We're not putting an unhealthy salad dressing on a healthy salad. We're putting a healthy salad dressing on a healthy salad.
Okay. And what about eating windows? Not necessarily with intermittent fasting, but which I'll get to in a second. But should we not eat after dinner? And what time is the latest that we should eat in relation to our bedtime?
Minimum of 3 hours, better off 4 hours before bedtime. Yes, it's better to have an earlier window at night because you want to finish digesting before you go to bed at night. And last night I screwed up. I try my best, but I'm not always perfect. It was a birthday in my house, and I made the ice cream for the party. And so I took bananas, frozen bananas, macadamia nuts, and some cashews and real vanilla bean powder and soy milk, and I blended it all up with no dates. The banana was sweetened up, and I put it in the ice cream maker, and it made this delicious ice cream, which we had on a homemade, I think it was a homemade apple pie or berry, but I had actually both, which my daughter made. It was all with no sugar. It was all healthy stuff. But you know what? It tasted so good that I had so much of this banana ice cream that when I went to bed last night, I still felt I was digesting the food. It wasn't that it was that I overate. When you overeat, it takes too long to finish digesting it. And then when you go to bed at night, you can feel some reflux or something's going on up in your belly, and you're not getting number one, you're not getting the anti-aging effects of going to bed where your body is fully healing. And number two, it's not good for your digestive tract to keep food in your stomach in that long because I overate. So it really gave me a wake-up call, that I got even that, especially on birthdays or something where you make some special dessert or something, put it out, make that small amount, enjoy that little bit, but don't go crazy on it because it could upset your digestion at night.
Yeah, to be honest with you, just to hear you say that, it's people try to be perfect and they get very upset, and it's just nice to hear that even people who are on it as good as you are human, and we can forgive ourselves for that. But obviously, it doesn't feel that great, regardless.
Right.
So I appreciate you sharing that. So we've heard multiple people talk on B12 and the type of B12. Does it matter cyanocobalamin or methylcobalamin?
No, it doesn't. It's unimportant.
Okay. And are there any plants that we should avoid in our diet?
Yes, which I'm mad about. I'm in mourning over not eating cherimoyas anymore because I love cherimoyas. They're my favorite food, but they're linked to Parkinson's disease, and they've been studies show that that family of plant, which includes pawpaw and soursop and custard apple and cherimoya and atamoya, those plants. I forgot the name of that grouping of food, which is like I put 10 trees in my property. I loved it so much that are now being more linked to dementia for people who eat them. So I cut down the trees. I removed all the plants. Star fruit is also can cause problems in the body if you eat much. So that's also is also food you shouldn't be eating much of. And there are some other plants that are also eaten that are not that good for you. Besides, let's see. Um, There's a couple of others that are more unusual, you know what I mean, that you don't get that much in this part of the world. But I mean, but those are the two that come to mind are the star fruit and the cherimoya type, soursop, sweet sop, are those we should not be eating. And I stopped eating them myself. I was eating a lot of that stuff. I was so happy I was living in California because I could get more cherimoyas and grow my own cherimoya trees. It was my favorite food. And then when I started seeing all this research about it, I said, oh, shoot, God, so I'm so disappointed I can't eat that stuff.
Well, I've never been introduced to that stuff, so I'm not even gonna look it up because I don't want to like make myself miss it. So, and, all right. So, and how about coconut? Is that with its saturated fat content? Is that problematic?
Yeah, I would think that I don't think a little coconut's a problem. We put like a coconut into like our Thai curry sauce or something, But I think it shouldn't be a major source of your fat intake. It shouldn't be a major source of your nut intake. The other nuts are so much healthier and have omega-3 intake. I even recommend that half of our nut and seed intake come from flax, chia, walnut, hemp, and sesame. That we should have half our nut intake come from that group of 5 or 6, maybe pumpkin in there too. And then you could still, I still recommend pistachio nuts and those other nuts, like Brazil nuts or pistachio nuts. But certainly coconut is not something I'm particularly recommending. And if you are using it, use it in more limited quantity. But I still can use it. You can have a limited amount of saturated of something like that.
So I think it's one of the things that you introduced to the conversation, within the plant-based community, which was EPA to DHA conversion. Is that an issue of the fact that people don't have the right ratios in their diet of omega-3s to omega-6, and that's why they have a problem converting it? So that if they had a closer to a 1-to-1 ratio between the two, they would be better at converting it? Or is it like why, or is there something else that causes that problem?
Something else. In
Okay.
other words, it's being on a vegan diet that you by not having because there are some people that convert enough, but those are the minority of people. So, and they're genetically gifted. So what I'm saying right now is even when you have a large number of people on vegan diets try to manipulate their dietary fat intake to eat much more omega-3 and eliminate omega-6 as much as they can, they still wind up being deficient in the omega-3 index. And they still wind up could have problems and deficits due to that. So if you want to fat manipulate to improve your omega-3 index and it works for you and your level of your omega-3 index is 7, 8, or 9, great. Then you don't need to supplement, right? But that's rare. That's like there's not more than 1 in 10 people who usually can get to that. So yes, dietary manipulations can help some people, but most of us don't have enough ability to genetically convert the short chain omega-3 into enough long chain omega-3, even if we consume more of the short, even if we ate more flax seeds and or restricted more omega-6 nuts more. So there's too much evidence to be able to ignore it, to the fact that a low omega-3 index has dangers, and the dangers are not only dementia, Parkinson's, and brain shrinkage, but it's also decreased all-cause mortality, which means increasing risk of cancer when your omega-3 index is too low.
And if we were to get a blood test, what would we be looking for on a blood test? Is it DHA that we would be looking for? And
No, the best number to look at is the omega-3 index. It's called the omega-3 index, the level of DH, because that number tells you the relative amount of EPA and DHA compared to the omega-6 fats and omega-9 fats on your cell membranes. So it's or all of, but by the way, when a person has more body fat, it's harder for them to supplement into the most favored range because more body fat and more fat intake it's the fat on your body that makes the level of the anti-inflammatory fats being a lower percent. If you just kept the same level of omega-3 and you lowered the body fat, your omega-3 index would go up as a percent of total fats. So we're talking here about having a low body fat percent and eating these short-chain omega-3, not overeating oils or fats, and also supplementing. You need to do all those things for the majority of people to be pushed into the favorable omega-3 index, which is above 6, which is 6 to 9.
And what is the so 6 to 9 is the right range that you should be on for that index, you said?
Yes, we have more studies coming out in the last 2 years demonstrating that not only was brain size better, but overall mortality and longer life was enhanced when people got above 6.
You mentioned eating raw cabbage. What are your thoughts on fermented cabbage and fermenting in general?
I think fermenting can be good, but I'm careful about the salt consumption with fermented foods. And so like I might have a person with a breast or prostate cancer, a hormonally sensitive cancer, and I might have them be taking a fermented soy drink, but the fermented soy drink has no salt in it. It's been nitrogen fermented. Right? It's a special product made for that. So the answer is there are some benefits to fermented foods, but those benefits are offset by the extra salt in a lot of these fermented foods. So we can ferment things with vinegar and bacteria and cultures, and we can make fermented foods without putting a lot of salt in. So I'm saying if you do use fermented foods, learn how to make those fermented foods without excess salt.
Okay. And I don't know if you know about fermenting. Do you know what would be considered a healthy amount of salt? I've seen recipes for like a couple of teaspoons of salt when you're fermenting cabbage. Is there like an amount that you would stay under?
Well, I'm telling people in general that I don't want them to use more than 200 or 300 milligrams of sodium over and above what's in their normal diet per day. So your normal diet, we already discussed, could be between 600 and 800. Then the additional sodium you take in that's not in your normal diet, whether it's from mustard or ketchup or from a piece of Ezekiel bread or from something fermented, should be under that 100, should be under the couple of hundred, maybe 300 for male and 200 for a female, should be the max they would be to add to their otherwise food sodium that came from the natural foods.
So during your talk, there was a couple of posts in the chat saying anyone can get heart disease, anyone can get cancer. How do you respond to that in light of the whole talk that you gave today?
I don't know what they mean by that. Anyone can get heart disease, anyone can get cancer. What do they mean? Are they saying this doesn't matter? I can eat anything I want and not get cancer or not get heart attack.
That's how I took it. I don't know,
What do they mean? Or are they saying that sometimes you're exposed to cancer elements like asbestos or chemicals or smoke or stress early in life that cause so much damage that even if you eat right, you still are going to get cancer anyway. And there are some unusual cases so we're not saying that in every case that a person eats right, they can't get cancer. But that's because they've had other strong cancerous exposures and they ate and those exposures were so severe earlier in life. It still doesn't mean cancer would not be 100% protected against had they lived in a clean environment and had the right diet from birth. And also some cancers are caused by what your mother ate. You can what if you get acute blastocytic leukemia at the age of 2? Well, that's linked to the lack of vegetables in the diet of the mother's diet and her exposure to luncheon meats, which increases risk of blastocytic leukemia in their offspring. So yes, but just because the leukemia is related to the mother eating hot dogs before you were born, it doesn't mean it still not caused. It still has a causation, and it still could have been protected against if the mother's diet was good. So any way you look at it, this person, so you're not still going to get heart disease. You're not still going to get cancer if you make the changes early enough in life. And if your exposure, if you haven't had some unusual exposure that may be too highly toxic. So what I'm saying is that nothing's 100% guarantee, but you'd be really foolish not to stack the cards in your favor when nutritional excellence has so much power to control your health destiny.
At one point you mentioned, eating too much potato. Assuming that it's cooked healthy, we're not talking about French fries and chips. Can potato be good for you? What do you consider too much?
That has to be answered on an individual basis from person to person. Could LeBron James, exercising all day long, have more potatoes? Because he's already eaten his broccoli and his soybeans and his nuts and his berries, and he ate all the healthy stuff. So he has room in his diet without pushing himself into too many calories to stuff, and he's going to burn off those extra calories anyway. So maybe he can have more potato, but can a woman who's 5 foot tall, who only has a 1,100, 1,200 calorie caloric window, fit much potato in there without excluding all the other healthier things she could have been eating that protect against cancer? And what about this person who's overweight and the glycemic effect? The point I'm making right now is that we have to score foods on a hierarchical scale of best, better, moderate, okay, and worse. Obviously, broccoli is better than cauliflower, and cauliflower is better than potato, right? And potato is better than white rice, and we're going to score things. But when we're looking to fight cancer, potatoes are not a cancer-fighting food. If you put too much potatoes in your diet, then you pushed off your plate the space that you would have needed to eat some of the more powerfully protective foods. So you can't eat that. So a potato-based diet or a grain-based diet or a rice-based diet are not ideal diets for longevity and anti-cancer benefits. So I have a little bit of I have some potato in my diet. And what I do, I make a mashed potato with 6 cups of cauliflower, chopped spinach, and 1 Yukon Gold potato with fried onion and roasted garlic, and it tastes like the greatest mashed potato you ate. But it's 6 but the percent of potato in there is relatively low compared to the cauliflower, the spinach, the onion. It still gets the potato flavor from the 1 Yukon Gold I added in there. So in other words, I'm looking at my whole plate and saying, today, did I eat all the favored food I needed to eat? And if I eat too much potatoes, I can't get it all in. I can't get the beans I want to eat, right? So beans are more favored carbohydrate than potato, particularly when you have a metabolically challenged when you're overweight too. So the answer is, it depends on the individual.
Okay, and just for the sake of the recipe, I'm hearing 6 cups of cauliflower, 1 Yukon potato, and then some sauteed onions with spinach, I assume sauteed in water.
Well, I sauteed the onion on a dry pan.
Okay.
Nothing in the pan. I got the pan hot first so the onion wouldn't stick to it. Because I put the water in it, it dilutes makes it doesn't get flavorful enough. I cut up the onion, I put it on the hot pan, it sizzles and it just starts to glisten. I pull it off, mix it with the mashed potato, and I make some garlic nutter. I put a little roasted garlic with a little bit of nuts like cashews and hemp seeds with the roasted garlic I already had in my refrigerator. I took a little bit of that, mixed in that in there too.
And then the spinach, where's that coming from?
Well, the spinach could come from anywhere, but sometimes I could just put some frozen spinach in there, just to.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Beautiful. I'm gonna try that. You're talking about cooked mushrooms. How about mushroom coffees, which have become popular, where it's just blended mushroom, not actual coffee?
I think that's good. I even make one of those.
Okay. All right. Awesome. And how about regular coffee? Is there a place for coffee in this style of eating?
It's not the biggest thing for me I'd much rather people pay attention to not drinking alcohol. That's the big thing. And a little coffee, one cup of coffee is not so bad, but I'm not an advocate of coffee. I think the studies showing coffee's benefits because of its flavonoids are indicative of how low the American diet is in flavonoids that makes even coffee something beneficial to them, but it's not beneficial to us with a high flavonoid diet. And the caffeine interferes with sleep and lets us get by with less sleep. And it makes it feel like you don't have to sleep as well if you can use caffeine to alert yourself. And it's addicting, and it also has negative effects on the brain. So I am not a coffee advocate, though the person loves to have 1 cup of coffee a day. I'm not going to make a big deal of that. But nor do I accept all those studies showing coffee is so beneficial. I kind of disregard a lot of that because I consider the context of how bad the person's diet is. You know what I mean? And the benefits from coffee we don't need if we're already eating beans and stuff.
So you used the term dysplastic at one point, saying that the cell becomes dysplastic. What does dysplastic mean?
It means that the cell starts to become abnormal, even though it's not yet become cancerous. it's an early stage of abnormality before it turns into cancer.
Great. And what are your thoughts on, I'm going to break this down into two parts. I'll start off with intermittent fasting in general.
Well, we started to talk about time-restricted eating, where you're eating a lighter diet, right? And we want people not to overeat. And some people are more successful with intermittent fasting, losing weight rather than sticking to their diets consistently from day to day. I find my experience over the last 40 years has been that people who are overweight and have trouble staying on the diet or eating the right amount of calories, they do better when they can learn exactly what to do and then practice it and repeat that same thing over and over again for many months till they get it down. So changing from one day where you're having low amount of calories and then you do that for a few days and then you go to a high amount of calories, I find in the long term, it leads to more of the diet mentality and people yo-yoing on and off with extreme caloric restriction. And I'd rather people I get less recidivism and more consistency in people eating the right amount of food when they practice it right and don't go from one extreme to the other extreme. So I'm a little more cautious in my use of fasting and intermittent fasting, particularly in people who have trouble with food addiction and overeating. I'd rather them just kind of iron down what they're supposed to do every day and stick with it and just not eat late at night. That doesn't mean I don't recognize the studies on intermittent fasting or the fact that I use intermittent fasting when I'm dealing with a person with cancer and they need chemotherapy. We're intermittent fasting or restricting them on the 3 or 4 days before their chemo to let the chemo have less side effects and have the chemo be more effective. So I might be utilizing fasting therapeutically. I might be using water fasting with a person with asthma to get off to be able to, they don't need inhalers anymore, or with a person with an unhealing, and still I'm using it in the toolbox, but I'm not using it across the board for most people. It's used very selectively. Most people do better with just consistency, doing the right thing day in and day out.
Do you have a cookbook?
Yeah, I have lots of cookbooks. The Eat to Live cookbook was one of my best-selling cookbooks, but I also have the Eat to Live Quick and Easy cookbook. But all my books, every one of them all my cookbooks have lots of recipes in them, but every one of my regular books has more than 50 recipes in them, have a lot of recipes.
Oh,
So
wow.
here's the Eat to Live. This was one of my 7 best-selling books. This is a #1 New York Times best-selling book called the Eat to Live Cookbook, which is my personal favorite. But a lot of people like the Eat to Live Quick and Easy cookbook because that's the one that has the recipes without so many different ingredients in them. But I don't care about that. I just rather have but yes, all my books have recipes in them, and I have I think I have more than 1,500 recipes on the website too, on my website, where you can search the type of recipe you want to look at.
So we've about a minute left. What would be, if someone could make one change as a starting point to moving toward this direction, what would you suggest that starting point be, that single change?
Lunch. The single change would be lunch. Lunch is a meal you eat out of the house, and you're susceptible to eating junk or garbage. And that's the meal where you should have a big salad, a bowl of soup, and a piece of fruit. You should bring your lunch with you. Or you go to a salad place and get a salad bar. So breakfast is easy. You can have some cereal, some oats with seeds and berry and fruit on it. Dinner, is something you should be eating lighter and earlier. But if you get the lunch right, you've got half it down. You've got half of it under your belt already. Just get the lunch right.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Fermented. It's a lot of really great information. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
If we could unmute the audience so that they can show their appreciation.
Thank you, Dr. Fuhrman.
Thank you.
Always
Here.
wonderful information again.
Thank you.
Staying for 2 hours. That was great. 2 hours.
Amazing.